Hello, my name is Jeanette. Welcome to my channel where I dig into true crime cases and break them down for you. Today, I'm going to be discussing the case of the Turpin family. If you're unfamiliar with the Turpin family, this story broke in 2018. There was a family of 13 children that had been tied up, beaten, and chained to their beds and starved for what amounted to be their entire lives by their parents. This story is horrifying when you get into some of the details. One child was found chained, and two others had clearly just been unchained. All of the children were suffering severe malnourishment, with authorities saying that the eldest daughter, who was 29 at the time, weighed only 82 pounds. Only the youngest child and the family dogs were well fed. There is also a lot of information that was provided by family and friends, relatives who hadn't seen them in a long time, neighbors who witnessed odd behavior, all kinds of people. I'm also going to dive into how our society played a huge role in how these parents were able to keep this hidden for so long from CPS, law enforcement, family members, literally everybody. We know our society can be pretty effed up, especially on the fringes where people go unchecked, and that can lead to tragic consequences. And then I'm going to give some updates about the kids and how they're doing today, so stay tuned for that. First, make sure to like this video and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss my future videos. With this case, it helps to go back to before the children were born, back to a time and place of big shoulder pads and bigger hair. David and Louise Turpin were both born and raised in the small Appalachian town of Princeton, West Virginia. Louise Ann Robinette was born on May 24th, 1968, one of 6 siblings and the daughter of a local preacher, Wayne Turpin, and his wife, Phyllis. They were not what you might call well off. You might be able to guess a preacher's income isn't really enough to support a lot of children, especially if you don't have one of those like super churches. This was certainly the case with the Robinette family. I would say that they were definitely in poverty. They lived in basically a shack with 5 people. David Allen Turpin was born on October 17th, 1961. The Robinette family were devout Pentecostal Christians, and it was at the Princeton Church of God, where Wayne preached, that David and Louise fell in love. Now, if you are unaware of the different kinds of churches, Pentecostalism is very interesting in their practices. If you have ever heard of an old-fashioned tent revival, kind of a la the movie Fried Green Tomatoes, the preacher is loud and praises the Lord a lot. I heard the religion described as a high-octane, super-personal shout-a-thon. It's like mainlining Jesus. The revival lasts a very long time, and it's almost like a talent show because they need to fill the time. So they invite old ladies to sing gospel songs, and if like your cousin's college roommate's best friend wants to have their 10-year-old son play the drums, that's cool too. Then they speak in tongues and start healing each other with their hands and fall down when Jesus, I don't know, like I think he smacks them in the face, not really exactly sure. It's very Appalachian. Louise was 16 and a 10th grader in high school. David was 23 and a computer engineer student at Virginia Tech University. David had come from a religious upbringing as well. As a matter of fact, he has a brother that is a pastor now that volunteered to adopt all of the children after everything went down. The relationship between David and Louise was kept a secret from Wayne Robinette, Louise's father, but her mother, Phyllis, allowed the two to carry on behind closed doors, which was not normal for a devout Pentecostal family at all. In 1985, David showed up at Louise's school without her permission or consent or knowledge. He essentially kidnapped 10th grade Louise from high school with the intent to try to marry her. Kind of like Ferris Bueller's Day Off, but like the West Virginia version. They ran away over 1,000 miles to Texas in a vain bid to elope. The authorities tracked them down and made them return because Louise was still a minor. David and Louise returned to West Virginia, and despite initial objections from her father, Wayne Robinette, eventually he gave his blessing to the couple to be wed. Louise and David were married in a small ceremony at the family church. It was a cute little wedding. The pictures of the nuptials don't shed any light, however, on what is to come. Because of their religious beliefs, David and Louise were committed to having as many kids as possible. They were part of what is called the Quiverful movement, which you may be familiar with. There are a few families that were on reality television shows that you might know of. All these families are adherents to this belief that God wants couples to have as many children as possible, and that a man is only full when his quiver is full of children. And a quiver of arrows is like 12, I think. So, which, do you, boo? But damn, that's a lot of kids. After marrying, they didn't actually have any children until their first child, a daughter, was born in 1988. Relatives did note that the family was pretty strict on the first daughter, but not anything that would be close to qualifying as abusive, just extremely strict. The family moved to a lavish home in the Fort Worth area in 1992 and began living what seemed to be a luxurious lifestyle. David secured a high-paying job as an engineer and was being compensated very well. The couple were able to afford to fly Louise's entire family, siblings, parents, everybody, and pay for all the expenses for them to fly there, stay there, everything, even though Louise was a stay-at-home mom. During these visits, again, the children were treated in a strict manner and seemed pretty thin, but not malnourished or abused. Louise's sister Teresa even spent a summer between college semesters with the family, and she noted some odd occurrences. Namely, she wasn't allowed to have any guests at the home or even receive phone calls. They had to know where she was at all times, and they wouldn't even let her lock the door when she showered. But again, odd behavior, even overbearing behavior, doesn't mean someone is abusive. While living in Fort Worth, the oldest daughter attended day school, and some classmates reported that she had hygiene issues, an outdated haircut, and wore the same clothing every single day. Being a child in grade school is hard enough. I'm sure this was grounds to be teased and bullied. Around this time, they began homeschooling the children. Whether it was because of the bullying initially, we just don't know. Between 1992 and 1998, David and Louise squeezed out another 5 children. All of the children's names start with a J, though out of respect for these children, I won't be naming them or showing their photos. You can find this information. It's out there, but out of respect, I'm just not going to say that. None of these children or any born after would ever attend a public school while in the care of their parents. And in 1999, the home in Fort Worth was foreclosed on, despite David's 6-figure salary, and the Turpins picked up and moved, this time to Rio Vista, Texas, to a rural home. The family at this point became hyper isolated, and this is where the abuse really began. In fact, the children never saw their extended family in person again. Teresa Robinette, Louise's sister, reports that she spoke with them on Skype and had commented on how little the children were, but Louise explained it away. Louise was a tiny lady herself, so she was able to just kind of explain, oh, they're just little. At some point, Louise cut off Skype calls and relegated her siblings to only vocal calls. Neighbors at the time, Ricky and Shelley Vineyard, had 2 daughters the same age and were looking forward to the girls having some new playmates. It soon became clear that something was wrong when one of the Turpin daughters came over and her hands were white, like she was wearing white gloves.
I had to pull her back. I had come across the kids out there with Ashley. One of the younger girls looked at the older girl, and then I noticed how white her hands were. At first, I thought they were gloves. And I said, whoa, I thought you had gloves on there for a minute. And she goes, you wash to the wrist or else you're wasting water. And the way she spoke was really, strange, like she might be a little slow.
While in Rio Vista, the family had another 6 children, 5 girls and 1 boy, and at some point outgrew the home they were in. To say they outgrew it is somewhat of a mischaracterization. It seems like they kind of just trashed the place until the home no longer fit them or their things. It was a huge property, Texas. Everything is big there, so they say. Behind the home, way back on the property, there was a trailer at some point, like way back on the property, and they moved into it and they basically just trashed the entire thing. After that, neighbors reported they were no longer seen outside for a long period and were supposedly only allowed out at night. There's a solid chance that they were also so far back on the isolated property that no one really bothered to look for them. One neighbor reported that she saw brand new bicycles purchased for the children sitting in the driveway, but they were never used. She never saw the children riding them or out playing. Parents basically let those bicycles sit there and rust. It was also in Rio Vista that the oldest daughter finally got up the courage to run away from her abusive parents. That is a gutsy move, very risky, especially considering how rural the area is. You can go miles and miles and miles without seeing anything. A house, a car, a barn, a person, anything. She was picked up down the road by a neighbor, but unfortunately, due to malnourishment and lack of education, everyone thought she was developmentally delayed. When the children were found, they didn't know what medicine was, didn't know what police officers were, didn't know what a library was. So the oldest child had no frame of reference for what the world was like and really didn't know how to ask for help. The courage that girl had to build up to do that, knowing that if she didn't succeed, she probably would be beaten, is just heroic. Eventually, the family abandoned that home, probably because David got a better job or because it was trashed. Who knows? In 2010, the Turpin family picked up and one last time moved to their final home in sunny Perris, California, into a quaint suburb that was none the wiser of the horrors that were about to set up shop in their Tony town. We know that David and Louise had a love of traveling. They just love to travel. Particularly, they like to go to Disneyland and Las Vegas. So much, in fact, that they had Disney passes for Disneyland and even brought all their children to 2 vow renewal ceremonies in Las Vegas. This move brought them closer to the happiest place on earth. There are a lot of photos of the family all together at Disneyland, so it's not like the children were locked in the house all the time and never allowed to leave. They also knew that their sister had already attempted to escape and nobody did anything about it. Plus, I'd imagine on these trips they were very well supervised, and if they stepped out of line, would probably be punished. David and Louise even had Disney-themed vanity plates reading D-Land and DL Forever. There is a video of the family at the Elvis Chapel in Las Vegas with all the siblings. The Elvis impersonator / officiant noted that they seemed thin, but they seemed like a loving and close-knit group.
Live from Las Vegas, yeah. For my darling, he loves you. The two of you have been for 30 years. And the two of you still will be husband and wife together forever. And would the children please join me down front? Yeah. Oh yeah. Won't you wear my ring around your...
During the family's time in California, there wasn't much interaction with neighbors at all. One neighbor reported seeing the children marching from room to room when he would come home from working the late shift, but stated he thought maybe it was some kind of odd therapy. It blows my mind that the sheer number of people who saw these weird occurrences and didn't say anything. But then again, I don't know what I would do. Like, what signs do you look for? In 2011, the Turpin family established the Sandcastle Day School to be taught by Louise Turpin and David as the principal. Not long after that, the family filed for bankruptcy, despite David being an engineer for defense contractor Northrop Grumman and making a salary of $140,000 a year. The family was at this point between $100,000 and $500,000 in debt. Filing for bankruptcy wasn't a big traumatic event in their lives. It didn't uproot everyone and ruin everything. It was just kind of a matter of expunging some of their debts so they could keep on spending and living this lavish lifestyle that they wanted to think that they lived while abusing their children. During this time in California, another daughter was born, bringing the total number of children at that point to 13. This is the daughter that, when found, was the only child that wasn't severely malnourished and severely neglected. There are photos of Louise during her pregnancy wearing certain shirts, pregnancy shirts, stuff like that, with a brand new crib in the background. And so it seems like she was excited about this pregnancy. There are also photos from the time between the birth of this daughter and the discovery of the abuse, and it's clear that the children were out in public and no one spotted this abuse. The children were even put in matching outfits and paraded around, including the oldest ones who were well into their 20s at that point. Cut to the night of January 14th, 2018. Two of the middle daughters, one of whom had kept a secret phone for 2 years, made the daring decision to run, knowing full well what happened to their sister when she tried the same thing years before. This same 17-year-old daughter also kept a secret YouTube page of her singing songs about freedom and wanting to get out and live her life. It's just so poignant. So after the two sisters escaped, one of the sisters became frightened and decided to turn back, but the 17-year-old, who I'm sure will always be a hero in her siblings' eyes, continued on her journey to freedom with that out-of-service phone and was able to dial 911. She reported that her siblings were being abused and 2 of her sisters were tied up at that exact moment.
Yeah.
Okay, I live in a family of 15 people, and my parents are abusing. They abuse us, and my 2 little sisters right now are chained up.
And how many of your siblings are tied up?
2 of my sisters, 1 of my brothers.
How are they tied up, with rope or with what?
With chains. They're chained up to their bed.
Are you homeschooled?
No, we don't do school. Our mother tells people we're private schools, and she has a fake private school set up. But we don't really do school. I haven't finished 1st grade, and I'm 17.
After this daring escape, police were able to find the home and swoop in to arrest David and Louise. What they found was a truly horrific sight. 1 child was chained to their bed, and it appeared another 2 had just been unchained. The house reeked of urine and feces, and it was clear the children weren't being brought to the bathroom when they were being kept tied up. It was also clear they were not being fed regularly. The 17-year-old, when picked up, had the appearance of a 10-year-old due to her growth being stunted, and everybody was shocked when they found out she was 17. The most severe malnutrition was among the oldest siblings, who had endured this abuse the longest. Not only that, but the house was trashed. There were holes in the walls, crayon and markers had been used on the walls. The bedrooms of the children were in complete disarray, and there was just a thick layer of a crud or crust over everything. It was clear no one was taking the dogs out when they had to go. No one was doing laundry. No one was really doing the dishes. It was just a complete mess. The home became a media circus as the true horror that had occurred in this house began to come into focus. It was obvious that the children were being fed, but not nearly enough. They were being malnourished. They were not being fed enough. In a sign of cruelty, the children told investigators that the parents would leave pies and other sweet treats on the counter, but would never allow them to eat any of these treats. The officers believed all of the children to be under the age of 18 when they were found. That's how small they were. The oldest were 29 and 26, I believe. The garage was found to be full of new toys in the original packaging, as well as a plethora of DVDs, things the children were never allowed to play with or have access to. But one thing they were allowed to have were journals, which would become key evidence in this case against their parents. Dumbasses. Years and years worth of evidence of abuse and neglect, written down, recorded in their children's own words to be used against them in a court of law. However, one daughter, the brave 17-year-old who escaped to alert the world to her tormentors, had the courage to hide a phone for years from her parents. She's the one that had the YouTube page. It's amazing how resilient the human spirit can be. It appears the children were allowed to take 1 shower a year and would be punished if they washed their hands above the wrist. In an act of defiance, one daughter reported she would wash her face and her arms when it got bad, so bad that she couldn't stand it. If the children were caught doing this, they would be punished by being chained up, beaten, or even strangled. All of this appears to have been tactics to control these children. Some had even blossomed into adults through this extreme punishment. The oldest daughter was 29 when the abuse was discovered. The couple originally pled not guilty on all charges, but changed that plea when it became obvious that there was an overwhelming amount of evidence against them. On February 22nd, 2019, David and Louise each pled guilty to 1 count of torture, 3 counts of willful child cruelty, 4 counts of false imprisonment, and 6 counts of cruelty to an adult dependent. Both were sentenced to life in prison and the possibility of parole in 25 years. The couple will likely never receive parole due to the severity of their crimes, making it effectively a life sentence. 2 of the children spoke at the sentencing, and the parents also had statements read.
Sometimes I still have nightmares of things that had happened, such as my siblings being chained up or getting beaten. I cannot describe in words what we went through growing up.
My parents took my whole life from me, but now I'm taking my life back.
My children every day. I want to say again, I'm truly sorry. I am for everything I've done to hurt them. I love them more than they could ever imagine.
Count one.
It is clear that the parents had some kind of affection for their children, but whether they feel guilty because of what happened or because they were caught is hard to tell. In looking at this case, we need to ask ourselves, how could something like this happen? And how do we prevent it in the future? I believe there were 3 ways our society enabled this abuse to escalate and be carried on for so long. Issue 1, discouraging women to seek treatment for trauma. Louise suffered severe abuse at the hands of a relative, and she never dealt with this. After Louise was married to David, her parents required her to come back to West Virginia after running away, even though they technically didn't have a problem with the marriage. Louise's parents wanted her to remain under their control. They wanted her to have a proper wedding. The men in Louise Turpin's life controlled and abused her from birth, and that was all she ever knew. There are accounts from 2 of Louise's sisters, Elizabeth Flores and Teresa Robinette, of the abuse suffered in the home. As little girls, the Robinette girls were sexually assaulted by their grandfather. So it turns out that their mother was bringing them to her father in order to receive income for the family. So he was paying Phyllis to sexually assault his granddaughters. Sick. And from the way it sounded to me in all the interviews that Louise's sisters did, I think it was a necessary evil for Phyllis to survive and care for her children at a certain point. And I wonder if that affected the fact that Phyllis encouraged Louise to go with David and get married so young. Obviously, you don't sell your daughters for anything, especially that. But the least Phyllis could do was try to get her daughter out of there into what seemed like a better situation with David, who was going to school for something great, was going to make a lot of money, and she was pretty sure that Louise would have a better life. There's no excuse for what Louise did, but she did suffer immense abuse, almost to the point of torture during her childhood. I think that Louise may have initially been holding her children kind of like under her wing to protect them from potential predators, but that isolation became systemic and turned into abuse. Louise also grew up in a very devout and strict home, and I think this trickled down into her parenting, and getting any kind of help for her to deal with her trauma was kind of off the table. Louise instead addressed this abuse through exploring different religions, gambling, and substance abuse in her later years. Louise would speak with her sisters on the phone, and they would discuss the different religions the Turpins were exploring after being disillusioned by their Pentecostal upbringing. So in this case, because Louise and David didn't really have a chance to explore this wild side of themselves in their youth, sow their wild oats, so to speak, they took it upon themselves to do this in their adulthood. So this is a common response to trauma, to seek out forms of self-medication and self-therapy through things that could potentially harm you or become addictive. In Louise's case, there was some talk of substance abuse, including casual drug abuse and alcoholism. The couple also dabbled in snake charming, Satanism, witchcraft, and Wicca, as well as engaged in swinging. I'm not demonizing any of these things, but a sudden switch in a personality or interests like this can be a sign that there are some serious trauma issues that need to be dealt with. Unfortunately, the way that some groups of people look at therapy is that it's for the weak. It's possible that Louise, it was just never an option. It was disclosed that after her arrest, Louise was diagnosed with histrionic personality disorder, which can lead people to extreme behaviors even without trauma, but can also be triggered by extreme trauma. Histrionic personality disorder is fairly rare. Patients with this disorder use their physical appearance, acting inappropriately or seductively or in provocative ways to gain the attention of others. They lack a sense of self-direction and are highly suggestible, often acting submissively to retain the attention of others, and they're usually women. For people with histrionic personality disorder, their self-esteem depends on the approval of others and does not arise from a true feeling of self-worth. They have an overwhelming desire to be noticed and often behave dramatically or inappropriately to get attention. The word histrionic means in and of itself dramatic or theatrical. This disorder allows for unhealthy attachment and abuse to arise within relationships. It's possible that David got a dopamine rush seeing the children being punished by Louise, and this escalated to the point of abuse. With this disorder, Louise might be emboldened to do what David wants in order to please him and keep him happy. It's important to note that this trauma that Louise suffered not only led to her personality disorder and the abuse of her children, but also to a complete falling out with her parents. In 2016, when the Turpins had already moved to Perris, California, where their children would eventually be found chained and in deplorable conditions, both Louise's parents passed away. On her deathbed, Phyllis, Louise's mother, begged for Louise to come see her so she could speak to her one last time. Louise flat out refused to even speak to her mother as she lay dying, let alone go visit her. 3 months later, while Louise's father was on his deathbed, the same thing happened. I think Louise's trauma was so severe that she had become numb to anything to do with her family. Honestly, anything to do with anyone but herself, because she had been in survival mode for so long. For basically her entire life. She also used cruelty and abuse to get back at a world that had been cruel to and abused her. Another thing that contributed to this abuse, a lack of oversight with homeschooling. The family hid the abuse from school officials through homeschooling. David allegedly established the homeschool for the family after the eldest child experienced some bullying. The bullying was really egged on by the fact that these children were completely isolated and had no social interaction or outlet, along with the fact that their clothing wasn't washed, they weren't fed properly, and they weren't allowed to bathe. These children reported that they were not even allowed to speak to each other. What do you expect? As an adult, I recognize that this is the parents' fault, but children do not realize this and will tease your children if they are not well taken care of, basically. Though this may have initially been the catalyst, I think the overwhelming burden of having to educate 13 children became far too much for Louise. The strict upbringing she had carried over ended up transforming into abuse when the children became far too much to handle. When you compare the photos of their homes in Rio Vista and Perris, they really show a striking difference, and it's not just in the way the homes look, but the way the children behave. You can see that in Rio Vista, the home was destroyed. Not just some plaster that was bashed or drawn on. Things were rotted through with urine and garbage piled to the ceiling. The only way they could control the children at a certain point was to chain them up and deny them food in order to keep them from destroying their home. Even though their lack of parenting caused this behavior in the first place. I think there was also kind of a sick sadism in this for David and Louise to deny the children of something that they could then enjoy for themselves. Now, don't get me wrong. There's nothing wrong with homeschooling, and I give everybody credit for doing it. I even did it myself during the pandemic, and I don't mean remote schooling. I did homeschooling because I was pregnant. Yuck. But there are cases of abuse where homeschooling can be used as a guise to cover up abuse. Without being seen daily by teachers, principals, school nurses, administrators, this kind of treatment can go unseen for a very long time. It might be useful for some oversight to be put in place to make sure that in those cases, children aren't slipping through the cracks. The third and final issue, the breakdown of the community. In media reports, neighbors of the Turpins described some strange encounters with the children. However, none of these encounters were ever reported. The family who purchased the Fort Worth home took photos of the home when they moved in after the foreclosure, and it seemed to them that the home had been trashed. Naively, they thought that the prior owners were just upset that the home was foreclosed on and were taking revenge against the buyers. They never thought to report any abuse. Then in 1999, the Turpin family, with 6 children in tow, moved to Rio Vista, Texas. The isolation from family and friends allowed the abuse to just get worse and worse. The parents got away with increasing degrees of this inhumane treatment. The neighbors reported knowing that there was something off, but unfortunately nobody ever spoke up to say, what the hell is going on here? Why are these children acting so strangely? After they moved out, Ricky Vineyard helped clean the home out, and the house smelled. All the cabinets and refrigerators had padlocks on them. Everything was locked, like closets, sheds, everything. He even reported the bunk beds in the children's rooms appeared to have, the mattresses rotted through, and some of the beds had chains and ropes attached to them. He was also being naive about it and thought that maybe they were used to tie up animals. The cleanup crew even found dead cats among the debris. Ricky's wife, Shelley, stated in an interview with 60 Minutes Australia about calling social services for the children after seeing all the red flags. Quote, we thought about it, but then again, you're out in the country and you mind your own business, and you figure they want their business kept to themselves also. You don't realize what you're seeing. Evil is very deceptive. It can look good from a surface if you don't get in there too deep. Even the neighbor in Perris, California, who saw them only up at night and marching between rooms in a single file line, never questioned what they were doing or dug any deeper. He said, I thought maybe they were doing therapy. Weird. It's kind of a sign of the times, maybe, that we don't know much about our neighbors, don't know their names, and don't really make an effort to get ourselves involved enough in our communities. There's a saying that it takes a village to raise a child. What about 13 children? Louise and David didn't have a village and took it upon themselves. This abuse was able to escalate unchecked because these parents were able to somehow get all 13 of their children to fly under the radar of authorities for their entire lives, and also convince their children somehow not to say anything. And they were also able to convince neighbors that nothing was wrong even when the children escaped the first time. Though I wouldn't be surprised if David's former position as a computer engineer at Lockheed Martin had anything to do with the couple being able to slide this abuse by for so long. When you take all of this and put it together with the family's known financial issues, it's no wonder that this situation was able to grow into something truly evil. Now for an update. There isn't a lot of information on the 6 youngest children. Some reports say they were all adopted into a single family, but at least we know they were all adopted. The 7 oldest children, who are now adults, were initially brought to a hospital to recover, then were moved into an assisted living facility. Now they live in their own apartments, and they all kind of live nearby to each other and hang out. They often visit each other, and some have even decided to change their names, though these names have not been reported on. 5 of these children have decided to further their education and are interested in teaching, engineering. 1 already graduated college, and another is pursuing a career as a medical field technician. Some interesting facts that came out after the initial media frenzy that I thought were interesting. The children told investigators they were not allowed to eat anything but bologna or peanut butter sandwiches for years, to the point that one daughter threw up when offered a peanut butter sandwich by a counselor, who was unaware of this, and apparently all of the siblings avoid the peanut butter aisle in supermarkets. Something I thought was sweet was that the older siblings had made an attempt to escape once before while they were still with their parents by calling a taxi service. And where did they try to go to? Vegas. They remembered the trip with their parents to the Elvis Chapel as one of the happiest times of their lives. And they knew if they were to escape, they would go to Vegas together. But they didn't know where to be picked up from or where they would be brought. Despite losing years of their lives, I just hope these children, and some of them are even adults now, are able to reclaim their independence and are able to thrive now that they are free. Thank you for watching this video. Please make sure to like this video. I mean, you made it this far. Then go over and hit the subscribe button. Then make sure to comment what you think about this case and what you think about my 3 reasons why I think society enabled this abuse. Thank you.